Hey, good morning, everybody. I hope our rural internets and the Manitoba weather isn't interfering with our connections too bad this morning, but it seems to be set up all right. I'm Ken Sabache, and I'm sort of your introducer and moderator for the start of this morning. A couple notes. There were sort of residual questions that were coming in from the sessions yesterday. And just wanted to let everybody know that on Chris's presentation specifically, she's gone back and answered those questions in the session chat room. And the same thing will go really for today. We want to give the speakers ample time to teach us. And there seem to be more questions than the time allowed. But you can keep asking those questions on the chat rooms, and each of the speakers will get to them, and everybody will be able to see the questions and the answers. I know for myself, I was encouraged by these online meetings and stuff like that, that you wonder how many people are going to show up, and but the attendance yesterday was great, and the topics were outstanding, and I think it'll be no different today. This morning, it's sort of my privilege to introduce Joanne McArthur. I know I've been involved in the organic sector for 16 years, and communicating the value of our products, both to buyers and consumers in the competition of everything is always a challenge. And that's Joanne McArthur's expertise. She's worked with big consumers and retailers, with Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Cadillac Fairview, and a divisional president with Molson Coors. And her role has been on how to connect brands with consumers to the benefit of profits, and as well getting products at the front of shelves. So without any more chatter from me, I will let Joanne take the floor.
Thank you, Ken. Pleasure to be here. Wish I could be with you in person, but maybe another year. I am going to share my screen, so no judgment on the number of tabs I have open, please. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm here to talk about some trends that you need to know as you're looking ahead. And I like to say that, Nourish knows a lot about a little. We are a specialized marketing communications firm that only works with food and beverage clients, but we work across the entire food ecosystem. So that means we work with commodity groups, growers, agri-food processors, retailers, food service, not-for-profits. And I think because we work across the whole ecosystem, we can see how trends develop and change as they move through there, because it's a really privileged place. And so we started, I think it was 6 years ago, we started doing a trend report, talking about what we saw. And when I talk about trends, I'm not talking about fads, things that come and go. Trends are like serious shifts in society, and they continue over time. And so I'm going to be talking about some of the trends in the 2022 and a couple from past year as well that I think are relevant to what you're doing. And I'd recommend at the end, I'll show you how you can download our current years as well as past years. And hey, you can have fun just checking what our track record is as well. But if I look at this year, I truly believe we are at an inflection point. We're seeing a shared global crisis with COVID, and also, now that we're hopefully coming out of that, the world's really focusing together on climate change. And people talk about new normal, but it's really new reality, I think. Climate change has been called a code red for humanity by the head of the United Nations, and certainly, we all lived through a summer of crazy weather, whether it was too much water, not enough water, forest fires, and then we saw that heartbreaking disaster in interior BC as well. So what consumers are really understanding is that our health and the planet's health are really linked. And now we're seeing more than half of Canadians saying that they believe we're at a critical stage in terms of the health of our planet. On top of that, you're starting to see inflation. I'll talk about that a little further, but on a worldwide level, we're seeing inflation of, in food of 30% year over year. So, two big things really coming together. And this year, for the first time in our trend report, we actually talked about some generational differences that we're starting to see that are really significant. And so the seniors and boomers, they're still very much focused on personal health. But if you look at Generation Z, that younger generation, they are really focused on planet health, and eco-anxiety is very real for this generation. 72% say that climate change anxiety affects them personally. So if you want to be part of that emerging generation's choice set, you need to really offer them hope for a better future and align with their values. Because eating food's no longer just about human survival, it's also about the planet's survival. The other thing I'm going to preface this with is, when I take you through the trends that we believe are happening and coming, we're not making value statements. We have clients who are across all these different foods. What we're just trying to do is prepare you for what that future has in store. And, hopefully for those of you who are farmers, what crops should you be planting now to maximize your profits? So as I mentioned, the 2022 report has 11 trends. It's 40 pages. So I'm just going to touch on the ones that I think are most relevant to your business, but please, again, download it. And I'm also going to talk about a few things prior to that. But first, let's talk about the data, the numbers. So this is 2019, some international data on organics. And if you look at the US and you add Canada in, North America really, well, just US and Canada counts for about half of the world's organic consumption. But if you look at it on a per capita basis, you can see that something strange is going on. Canada is very much at the low end there compared to other countries. So, is that because of supply issue? There's just not enough organics to feed people who want it. Is it also possibly linked to shelf life? There's been a number of studies recently that talk about the fact that organic products have a lower shelf life. But whatever it is, there seems to be a lot of opportunity there going forward. We tell our clients that when they look at the last 2 years, we say we should call it the year of the asterisk. Put an asterisk beside that because, we saw so many different shifts. So yes, organics, we saw really, really strong growth. But some of that, again, was supply chain issue. If you only had one type of lettuce and it was organic on the shelf to choose from, you were buying that. We also saw that huge shift in share of stomach from food service, restaurants, to home. And so we saw premium cuts of meat, huge increase in sales there as well, because an organic grass-fed steak that you did at home on the barbecue, even though it's a premium price, it was a lot less expensive than buying that same item in fine dining restaurant. And consumers were treating themselves. So it's been a strange couple of years. Some of that behavior will stick, but we can't think that we can totally predict the future based on the past. And so if I look at the most recent US numbers, we're still seeing strong growth in organics. They're showing about 7%, but that's down from the previous year of 9%, but still above pre-pandemic levels of 5% growth. And that's because, consumers are looking to food for immunity support and overall wellness. So I see this number highlighted by the Organic Association, that 54% of Canadians say they trust Canada Organic Certified. And I have to tell you, I deal with a lot of research. And so when I saw this, I had a different reaction. I thought that was really low. And to me, it said, do consumers actually understand what organic means? Do they trust it? 54%, that is low. Are you getting lost in a sea of other claims? You know, we're starting to see B Corps, we're starting to see, you know, grassland fed, we're seeing, you know, regenerative, all sorts of fair trade. So, you know, that front of pack, there are a lot of different certifications on it. But personally, I would be concerned, because we know that trust is a critical currency with consumers, and it's also the way that you can justify selling things at a higher price and profit. And so if we look at the latest Ipsos 5, this is a huge Canadian, the biggest Canadian food tracking diary out there. They talked to 23,000 Canadians. And looking at what Canadians' top environmental, social, and governance concerns were, you can see that organic there is in 10th place right now. So you do indeed have a lot of competing claims out there in terms of consumer priorities. And interesting to me to see that whole regenerative farming, carbon neutrality, and I'll talk to this a little future, is right on the heels of organic, even though you know, there's not an agreed definition for this. And again, we're very much seeing that generational divide. You know, Generation Z, they basically, you can see they want it all. Whereas boomers and Gen X just want to understand, you know, where the product came from. So it's really important to understand who your target is. But regardless, we're seeing lots of questions around organic, which tells me that maybe consumers don't totally understand what it means and they're getting confused. This is just based on people's search history in Canada. So what questions are they asking Google and search engines about organic? You know, does it mean natural? You know, what does it actually mean? And then you go further into food, and there's more and more questions out there. You know, is organic food really better? You know, what's the difference? So lots of questions by consumers. So certainly one of the trends that we've seen developing over the last few years is something that we call made matters. And that's the whole idea of how is everything treated, whether it be the soil, where did my food come from, how were the workers, how were the animals, how is the planet taken care of. So, you know, the whole idea of, you know, better for me, better for the world. And radical transparency was a trend we had in our 2018 trend report. But I think at the time, producers, largely you weren't ready to actually open up the curtain and invite consumers in. But I think with COVID, that veil that was up there has really fallen. And, you know, consumers really want to be invited in. We saw consumers Googling things like food system. And that's not a word, that was not a consumer word prior to COVID. But when they saw empty shelves at grocery, they started to look into this. They didn't understand how food actually got from the farm to their grocery store. And if you look at, this is the Canadian Center for Food Integrity, you know, you can see that while consumers trust farmers, farmers are right up there with doctors and teachers, they don't necessarily trust farming. So again, there's a bit of a trust gap there as well. And, you know, we all probably remember Buttergate last year. And I use that as, you know, just sort of a way of understanding consumers and maybe learn from this a bit. And certainly there's more than two sides to this story. But to me, it's not just a story about animal science. It's also a story about consumer confidence and really understanding how your decisions, how your language falls and either raises or breaks trust with consumers. And, you know, especially with milk, something that's supply managed, it's kind of looked as a public good in Canada. And, you know, I've done work with dairy farmers, and I know that they don't always check all the way through to the consumer, because the dairy farmers, that's not their ultimate consumer or customer. And certainly palmitic acid has been used for a long time, but consumers didn't really understand that, and they're fed as nutritional supplements. But when it came out that it was actually from palm oil, which has a negative connotation with consumers because of all of the environmental issues, right, with climate change and deforestation. Even though you could argue there was a good news story there in terms of upcycling, we're taking a byproduct of that. Certainly a lot of the palmitic acid being used in dairy, some farmers, it was organic, it was done under great conditions, but they weren't prepared for that. They'd never checked how consumers would view that. So I think it's also just a great example of how you need to check, even though your practices may be good for the farm, make sure that your consumer sees it the same way. And also, be prepared, whether it's through, some crisis planning, some media training, that when the media does call you and say, hey, do you use palmitic acid? You can say, yes, and let me tell you, it's organic, or it's an upcycled ingredient. There was none of that preparation. And, butter really took a bit of a hit during that time period. This is an example I make of, organic not necessarily being enough with consumers. So we're seeing an example here of steel cut oats, that they're calling out the fact that it's glyphosate free. They're going that one step beyond just organic. And you could argue that, of course, it's glyphosate free, but don't assume the consumer knows that. So they're going that one step beyond organic certification. And if you look at glyphosate starting to pop up in the consumer lexicon as well, there's higher awareness of that. Consumers are Googling it more often. It's still a very small market. It's only the market last year was $204 million in terms of glyphosate-free products that were labeled that way, if you compare it to a massive market for non-GMO products, again, at 26 billion US. And that's also taking it one step further, saying it's GMO free, even if it's always been GMO. And again, it's that myth busting. And so as farmers, a lot of this, but don't assume that the consumer knows. You can call it a bit of a marketing game that A&W did when they did this guarantee about, raised without the use of antibiotics, without hormones. Well, of course, but the consumer didn't know that. The other thing that we found is that consumers don't understand that their milk is largely local. Right? It's, milk in Ontario comes from Ontario. Milk in Manitoba comes from Manitoba. But we're now starting to call that out on milk, especially as trade agreements are opening up and we're seeing more US imports there. And it's really getting credit for things that you're already doing, that you may take what's best about you for granted, but make sure that you check in with the consumer and see as well. Certainly we saw, a rise of social justice issues. Migrant workers were front page news, and, the whole spotlight on the people who harvest our food and how they're treated. You can see that was at the top left. That was an ad in a popular magazine for a union drive. And we're starting to see the rise of this food justice certified mark as well in North America. And, we thought that that might take the place of what we see fair trade. And fair trade is usually used with products that come from outside of North America. But again, we're starting to also see that pop up within North America. So Chobani, for instance, now uses fair trade certified for their US products. And we're seeing, consumers moving up to more sustainable animal proteins. We know that with younger generations, those under 35, dairy and meat are real hot buttons for them. So, you know, they're moving to things that are more premium, whether it's grass-fed, whether it's certified humane, and, you know, certified Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. You've got Audubon certified in the US. And it's more, you know, I heard somebody say it's not about the cow, it's the how. So taking advantage of that with consumers, the fact that you're preserving grasslands, the fact that, you know, you have a carbon sink. So we're seeing a lot more consumers eat less, but better. And also they started during COVID to develop those direct to consumer relationships with farmers as well for their meats. One thing we talked about in a previous trend report was environmental impact-based eating. And, you know, we're starting to see that really mainstream. So if you go into a Chipotle, for instance, you can calculate your environmental footprint of your order online. It has this real foodprint tool. And then Panera Bread, another big chain, they have worked with the World Resource Institute to develop what they call these cool food meals. So these are entrees that meet basically the standard for a meal that they've set, similar to how many calories you should eat in a day. This worldwide body figured out what your carbon footprint needs to be during a day, and they worked with Panera Bread to come up with these products that meet that. And I think, you know, most people think of organic as do no harm, but, you know, if you look at regenerative agriculture, it kind of goes that one step further, and it goes towards, I think, healing. And we've certainly seen soil health popping up a lot more in discussions by consumers. And this Netflix documentary, Kiss the Ground, that came out in 2020. It was a Netflix top documentary, you know, narrated by Woody Harrelson. And it really had soil as being the hero. And it was all about soil health and profitability versus productivity. You know, we saw Dr. Ratan Lal, he won basically the World Food Prize, which is like the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. So this is definitely starting to grow in terms of consumer understanding. And I think if you look at it, it really is it kind of brings, it's a unifying term, soil health, for a number of things that are important to consumers around organic. So, you know, that it brings in better flavor, it brings in better nutrition, and it also brings in better ecology. So soil health seems to be a bit of a short form for all those important factors for consumers. We're also seeing mainstreaming of this whole soil health as well as regenerative agriculture with consumers. And, you know, part of the issue is there isn't one definition. So you've got consumer packaged goods going in there and coming up with their own definitions and their own pillars of what makes that up. So for instance, General Mills, Annie's Mac and Cheese, they've made regenerative agriculture part of their mission statement. They actually went as far as a couple of months ago, buying hundreds of acres of land to make sure that they have enough product to support this mission. So if we look at that, we do wonder if, you know, the next step for organic is this regenerative organic certification. Is that where it's going with consumers? One of the trends we're seeing is, again, that purpose transparency as a way of really gaining consumer trust. And it's really moving from market to me, you know, just the ads, to matter to me. And we're in an age, I think, of increasing cynicism. And, you know, that whole radical transparency I talked about, you know, it's not a nice to know anymore. It's really becoming table stakes. It's a need to know. Consumers want to know your product life story, how ingredients were sourced, the processing practices, and they want that on the label and in the packaging. And it was, you know, this again was from that Canadian Centre for Food Integrity most recent year. And for the first time that we're seeing Canadian consumers think our food system is headed in the wrong direction. There's been a real significant decline versus past years. And also for the first time, global warming, climate change made the top 5 of life issues there as well. So what we recommend is you need to pull that curtain back, invite consumers in, and show them as much as you can what your purpose is, what your practices are. And I'm going to show you some examples of companies who are doing that. If you look at how far you can do it, Local Line, it's an e-commerce platform. It connects local farmers with consumers across North America, and it's a platform that allows farmers to sell directly to consumers. What's better in terms of transparency? iFinca is another app. And it connects coffee drinkers with the coffee farmers that's in their daily cup of joe. It takes them right through to, you know, this is where it came from, this is the farmer, these are the conditions. Coop Italia, this is the #1 grocery chain in Italy. And they actually give consumers the power, you know, their whole product supply chain in their hand through QR codes. So throughout the store, you can snap on things and see where it came from and the story of that. And Walmart, we saw in just this past September, they launched 2 labels under the Built for Better to support their sustainability goals as well. And you know, when you do transparency and traceability, it can turn what is a commodity good like eggs. I think everybody would argue that's probably a commodity. Well, guess what? With traceability, they are now able to turn that into a higher profit item and charge a price premium because they've opened that veil. So, you know, there you can actually see how the hens were raised. You can, you know, get a 360 view of the conditions that they were raised in. And it's a bunch of, I think it's 200 family farms in the US that have come together to do this. And we always say food always tastes better with a story, and you're gonna feel better about those eggs, and consumers are willing to pay a premium. And don't forget, like, I think it's less than 10% of consumers have actually ever been on a working farm. We've become very disconnected from our food system. And a lot of the messaging we get comes from the US, that whole vision of factory farming, which we know isn't the case here. So how much can you open that veil and invite consumers in? This is another example I use a lot because I think it's great. This is an Irish family that are potato farmers, and they went into added value chips, potato chips. And on the back, they've got something called Spud Nav. So you can take that, that code, put it into your browser, and it instantly takes you to the field where that potato was grown. So do you think that those potato chips are going to taste fresher than, the Lay's perhaps beside them? So again, show me versus tell me, far more powerful. And you have to remember that, you're dealing with younger generations who are very visual, right? And they're used to having the power of their cell phone to find anything. So, go beyond just words on a website. Show pictures, show even better, show video, or, can you even live stream in some cases conditions? And the nice thing is with technology, with QR codes, with satellites, these are all pretty easy things to do in this day and age. And we're also seeing, the power of the purchase order, driving change. Walmart, Costco, Farm Boy really does, they listen to consumers and they're really pushing organics. But the other thing I always say is, you will be held to a higher standard when it comes to packaging. So I think you also need to factor that into, if you have consumer goods, you need to also make sure that you're looking at your packaging, because consumers are going to expect that if you're organic, you are also using better for you packaging. So some food for thought. You know, I mentioned purpose transparency is becoming table stakes. So how can you bring in those consumers and build that trust and loyalty? What processes do you already have in place as organic farmers that you're really proud of, but you're not sharing yet? And again, you know, show versus tell in that case. Local matters. Another trend we're seeing. We trust and want to support our neighbors. And again, you know, it speaks to the consumer's desire for food with integrity. And it's interesting, you know, local, when you look at the research, you know, certainly in Ontario, I'm speaking to you today from Toronto. So here, a consumer would think that Vancouver or Manitoba is more local than Buffalo, even though distance-wise, it's, you know, Buffalo is much closer. But to a consumer, that Canadian border is a hard stop. So when I talk local, it really is, you know, from east to west within Canada. And again, local, it really is seen as tasting better, better for the community, and it equals higher quality. And consumers, frankly, they just trust. If they know it's a neighbor producing their food, even if they don't know who that neighbor is, you just trust that more. And during COVID, we saw a real rise in food nationalism. Consumers, you know, 4 out of 5 Canadians say they're willing to pay extra for locally grown produce. And, you know, not surprising after we've seen a number of food recalls as well over the past year with, you know, red onions, US peaches, romaine. We're also starting to see the rise of more greenhouses and more hyperlocal vertical farming. And the consumer research on that says that, you know, consumers, even though it's not organic, consumers feel that those products are at least the same quality, if not better, than those grown conventionally. And even though they're arguably also not all that sustainable energy-wise as well. But what it does allow is, you know, to grow and ship it at the peak of its flavor with a much lower transportation footprint. And that bottom picture is actually inside a Sobeys store. They have those in-farm units from Germany in their stores now that are growing fresh herbs and lettuces. So you can actually see it being grown in front of you, and somebody goes in and clips, and it's fresh that day. So it's a way of adding a little bit of theater. You know, again, the show me food tastes better when you can see it. But the question, I think, on a lot of this that, you know, I don't see a lot of discussion yet, but are the macrobiotics as good? Products that aren't grown in soil versus those that are. So I think there's some education potentially there as well. But again, you know, you may take for granted the fact that you're local, but make sure you call that out in your marketing as well. So we've been talking about plant-based for a number of years. It was a key trend in our 2018 trend report, but we're starting to see some real changes happening there. And you know, just like we were arguing that we thought plant-based, just like natural, had lost its halo effect with consumers, the same was going to happen with plant-based. And indeed, we're starting to see that. And we're seeing these two extremes, I would say. We're seeing the plant-based that's all about mimicking what it's not, right? Meat analogs versus products that are more about embracing the plant and talking about what's best about them, right? And both sides seem to be doubling down. And we're seeing really generational divides here in terms of, you know, is it better for me versus better for the planet? Boomers and seniors are looking at plant-based for health reasons, whereas younger generations are looking at it more for planet health reasons. So it's interesting, if you look at, you know, some of these products, Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat, they tend to be ultra processed products, high levels of saturated fat. So, you know, where a boomer may see that as an occasional treat, millennials and Gen Z see it differently. They see the, food science as being a key way of battling climate change. And it's interesting, if you go on Impossible Burger's website, they've actually, they use GMOs. They use GMO soy, they use GMO hemp in their products, and they're very unapologetic about it. This is, to them, this is the way they are going to combat climate change. And they have an explainer on their website for kids to go and teach their parents about this, about meat's impact, and using them as advocates. And it really reminds me of what happened with the anti-smoking advocacy. They went into the schools and got kids to then pressure and educate their parents. And the same thing is happening here. We're seeing that generation next becoming key ambassadors for food tech, which is seen more positively again by those younger generations. So here a lot of discussion around flexitarianism, right? So flexitarian is the idea of, maybe I'll be meatless on Monday, or I won't eat meat until dinner. And, that's interesting. But if I look at it, the vegetarian and vegans, people who label themselves as that, there's 7% of the population. And that number really hasn't changed. It tends to be more under 35, tends to be more female, tends to be in more urban markets. But it's, who knows if in the years ahead, as those generations get older, once they have families, will they stay vegetarian, vegan? Will we see that 7% starting to go up? But we saw, record meat sales over the last couple of years because everybody was going for comfort food. However, 47% of Canadians say they want to reduce their meat consumption. And so, what I find interesting is this concept of, I'm going to call it lessitarianism. So it's reducing your footprint, but not, it's an and rather than an or, right? I'm not a vegan or a meat eater. I am a lessitarianism. So it's that idea of blended products. And you've got a great example in Manitoba with Bump. That is, it's bringing the best of both worlds. You get the taste of beef, but you're also reducing your footprint by adding oats and pulses and things like that. We're seeing dairy blends, plant-based, and dairy and oat milk blend in the U.S. as well. And that's a bunch of farmers who are testing that. So you get, again, the best of both worlds. You can feel better. You're reducing your footprint, but you're still getting the taste and the nutrition that you're looking for as well. So again, who is your target demographic? And really think about that, because again, your formulation and how you position your product is really going to be impacted. And at the end of the day, is the sweet spot perhaps offering a product that's both better for you as well as better for the planet. Another one of our trends this year was cultivating your inner garden. So eating for gut health, starting to become mainstream. Everybody's heard of probiotics, prebiotics that are the ones that feed that, but now we're getting postbiotics as well, which are basically the waste products of those probiotics after fermenting. So it's really kind of upcycling on a micro scale. And consumer searches are going up around this. Lots of new products talking about microbiome, about gut health. You've got kefir, you've got sprouted grains, lots of fiber from your part of the world, flax, hemp, all part of this trend. And it's interesting. We've seen lots of consumers participating in those DNA research, right, where you can find out what your traits are and everything. But it turns out that it's probably our microbiome that defines our health more than anything, rather than our DNA. And we're starting to see a rise in these gut intelligence tests where you can see and get recommendations on how to maximize your microbiome. And more and more studies are coming out showing that gut health is linked to a lot more than than previously thought. It even goes as far as, liver function, lung function, and brain health as well. So again, we know that consumers are very protein obsessed, but they probably get enough protein. It's where they're really still lacking is fiber, and fiber is critical for this. So again, if you've got something that helps with gut health, call it out, because we're expecting to be seeing more and more claims here, increased interest, continued increased interest in fermented foods as well. Save and splurge, another one of our trends. I call it the high-low fashion trend comes to food. And if you know high-low, it's that concept of I'm going to wear a turtleneck from Joe Fresh, but I'm going to wear a designer blazer. That's sort of the high-low fashion trend. And we think it's going to start coming to food. During pandemic lockdown, consumers were splurging more on food because they didn't have a lot of other places to put it. So consumers were, again, trading up to that grass-fed beef. But now that things are opening up again, food inflation is getting very real. We're seeing in some cases double-digit, and that's not just supply chain issues. That's going to be climate change, and we think that's going to continue. So consumers are going to start redefining what value is, and we're also in a period of stagflation, right? So we're seeing slow economic growth coupled with higher inflation. And so what we're going to see is, depending on the category that you're in, consumers will splurge or save. So it's going to be that high-low mix and match idea. So as the price of plant-based meat comes down, will they shift there a little bit more? We know that organics are critical in certain categories. So while I may not look at it for, let's say, soup, but it's critical. I am not going to cut back in terms of baby food, right? That's sort of a table stakes. That's important. So I think we're going to start to see consumers look at economizing, and private label will be a way that consumers economize at both ends. There's a lot of good research there saying that consumers actually, trust organics, especially in Canada, or private label, trust a lot because it's seen as higher quality. So again, that perceived value of organic is going to still really vary by category. So important that you look at where is that price elasticity with that consumer as well. So are you well positioned if that, I call it sort of the mushy middle, gets squeezed, right? Consumers want to save or they want to splurge, and they're going to try to save some money in between. So what categories are going to lend themselves to premiumization and what are going to lend themselves more to discount or premium offerings? So this was one of our bonus trends this year. We had 10 plus a bonus, and it was about what's good for me is good for Fido. We're really seeing that humanization of pets that's happening. During COVID, a lot of pets were adopted. In fact, there are now more pets than kids in Canada. That's a pretty stunning number if you think about that. And we're starting to see the lines blur between food. So this is an example of something that's in the US, Ben & Jerry's. We all know and love Ben & Jerry's. They came out with a doggy dessert using a lot of the same ingredients as their plant-based products. But what was really interesting is they did not shelve it in the plant foods or in the pet food section. They put it right beside their other human products. So the idea was, what's good for, I'm treating myself, I will treat my dog as well. And if you look at a lot of consumer packaged goods companies, they also have pet food divisions, the Nestle's, the Mars of the world. So we may see more of that happening in the future. Also, we're starting, we know that pets have a huge carbon paw print. They're largely meat eaters, and they consume 20% of the world's meat. And we also know, as I mentioned, millennials, Gen Z, very value-driven, very planet health vision. So they're going to start questioning their pets' footprint. So this may be a place where we see more organics. It may be a place where that those, what I call those ick proteins that consumers may not eat, like insect, mealworm. There may be a place here for some blended products, again, to reduce that as well. And we're starting to see even some, Flexidogian is a term I've seen a few times. And, these are plant-forward dogs as well. So more plant-based products, maybe more of those blended products here as well. So, what other human trends can you be leveraging there with furry, the four-footed family members? If you look at, the number of consumers who don't exclusively feed their dogs kibble, their pets kibble, I think it's only 13% of pet owners actually only feed kibble. So they're looking for those treats. They're looking for something to add. So I expect we're going to see an increase in both organic and ethical ingredients in this area as well. So just a little bit about Nourish. We are, I say we're a full service. You can see all the different things we do here. We even have test kitchens for our clients, but everybody here is a food and beverage expert. And I like to say we know a lot about a little. So happy to talk to you further. You can go to our website, download the current year's trend report as well as past years. It's nourish.marketing, no .ca, no .com, just nourish.marketing. My contact details are there. Please reach out, please link in. And if I don't get to all your questions today, I will follow up as well. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and throw it back to Ken to share some, hopefully lots of questions.
I'm just opening up the chat section here. I know even one of the, as you're talking, what role does associations have in leading this communication effort on behalf of its members, and how much effect does a producer driven or a, the primary producer have a role in that?
I'm going to open a whole can of yeah. I think associations. I don't think a farmer can do it on their own. I don't think it would have the same credibility. I think association bodies need to do this, right? They need to define what it stands for with consumers, whether it's a checkoff system with producers, whatever it is. But I think that one of the key things of an association is making sure that the value is there for consumers, that they understand it, that it's trusted. That's why if you've got a certification, it needs to not just have the inspection and everything that goes with it. You also need that communication. What does that mark actually mean to consumers? And make sure you're communicating that and it has meaning for consumers, and that they're willing, they see the value in that, and they're willing to pay that extra money for that product. So yeah, I think it's critical for associations to be doing that work.
I see David Rourke, you're connected. Are you able to ask your question? I know it always comes across better as a voice than a typed out question. Are you able to unmute yourself?
I am. The question I asked is, as our planet becomes more unstable and perhaps food becomes harder to grow or raise, how does that affect these trends? And I'm assuming that science becomes more important than perception, so that some of the things that we promote and market are sometimes more perception than science.
Yeah, and we're certainly seeing, that's why I brought up the whole issue of GMOs. We certainly see more acceptance of GMOs with younger generations. They are more food science driven, and they understand that there will be a need for food science to be able to feed the billions of people on the planet, especially as we start losing growing areas due to climate change. So you've got younger generations being more science forward. I do think, though, that whole soil health piece is a sweet spot, regardless of generation, because it does take all of those different factors and bring it all together. And, you know, what's best about organics, you know, especially versus vertical farming, you know, it's the soil, right? It's what's in that soil. It's how you treat the soil and what's in the soil that provides the macrobiotics in the products that we feed ourselves.
Good, thank you.
Ian, I see you've got your hand up on the screen. I'm assuming that means you've got something urgent you wanted to ask.
Well, thank you very much. A very, very interesting conversation and insights on what's going on these days in people's thinkings. However, we put a lot of trust in a very few huge corporations and a lot of overplaced trust as far as being able to look after the soil and look after the environment and look after our communities. And at the same time, these trade deals have enforced that. And there's an expectation that consumers always want cheap food and companies always want maximum profit. However, this does not account for the climate change effects of you know, ignoring the costs of our waste and the cost of the pollution and the cost of not living your life according to you know, your best health and your best economy. So the economy doesn't line up with how Mother Nature lines up. And government has a role to play here, but government has been pushed off to the side by these trade deals and by these corporations and by the advertising that comes out of many of these well-meaning profitable companies. And I'd like your reaction to that, please, because I think it's important that we maintain some government supports and some critical direction over how the economy goes forward in order to help our planet, because that's what you're talking about with young people's perception of helping out the, you know, the planet. It also involves individuals because when it comes right down to it, how many people can Earth actually support?
Yeah, lot in there. So, I mean, I think there's an understanding that carbon is important, right? And government needs to reward farmers for, you know, carbon farming. So that needs to happen. I think there's also a growing understanding that we're not paying the true cost of our food. So while there's food inflation and maybe some sticker shock, food has been very inexpensive relative to past generations, and we're certainly not taking into account all of the impact there as well. Younger generations, they know that, boomers like myself, we're probably going to get out of this life okay. Younger generations, my grandkids, I'm worried, right? They are going to have a very different life. And, we see younger generations willing to spend more on food, partly because they understand the importance of it, partly because they've also kind of given up on certain dreams, right? The dream of owning a house. So instead, they're putting more money into their food because they understand that link between personal health, planet health, and how those are intertwined. And certainly, we see things like, bans in other parts of the world, whether it's, GMO bans in Europe, glyphosate bans in Mexico. These are all affecting our products here. But yeah, GMOs, will something change there? Will we need GMOs to be able to feed the planet? I don't know, but there's certainly, younger generations are certainly more open to that. They don't see all of these things necessarily as evil. And so, I think that goes back to, trying to define what is best about organic and probably the need for some education for consumers, frankly.
I think in your response there, Joanne, you answered a couple questions there. Kim Wilton, you had a question in regards to nutrients and stuff.
Yeah, good morning. I'd say every 6 months there's another study coming out comparing an organic apple to a conventional apple and saying they have the same nutrients, so there's no reason to buy organic. Yet at the same time, I'm hearing the regen ag movement and the soil health concept saying that technology is coming, that soon consumers will be able to have a tool that will be able to check actual nutrients in the grocery store to compare one apple to another. Do you see the nutrient soil health trend actually coming to consumers? And if so, will it simply be focused on the boomer and the older generation that we're focused on the actual health of the item versus the younger generation that are more focused on the environmental impact of how something is farmed?
Yeah, I'm not seeing the nutrient discussion that much, to be honest, yet. That's why I put that in question marks, the whole macro. And I was thinking more, lettuce that's grown in a vertical farm in water versus an organic lettuce that's grown in the soil. And I know from talking to different people, there's different views, that it's better for you if it's, got some nutrients from the soil. But I don't think anybody's really started to tell that story. So I just think that that may be a future opportunity, but I don't see it really popping up in terms of consumer discussion yet.
I know Marla Carlson, you had a question just on organic trust relative to others. Did you want to expound on that, or does that catch it?
No, that about catches it. Just, I'm interested in if you have any data on comparing the certified organic label to other labels in terms of trust. And is it more or less than 54%? And I also think it's important to look at trends, right? Like an increase in trust so that we can measure, the effectiveness of our consumer education. Yeah,
absolutely. So I bring that up because I've done, we have a number of clients that we do research for. So yes, I do know that that's low based on other studies that I've done that are proprietary for other clients. I can't share that, but that is a low number. And that's why I shared the Ipsos data that showed the ranking with consumers on just overall ESG. But 54% is quite low compared to some other marks out there. So I would be worried. When I saw that, I was a little shocked that that was actually put forward as sort of a positive, because in the research I've seen for other clients, that would not be strong.
Can I do my follow-up question,
Yes,
Ken?
certainly, yeah.
And then I just had a question about consumer confusion, because I hear this a lot, that consumers are confused about what organic is or isn't. And I'm just wondering if that actually translates into not purchasing organic products. And because I asked that question, because if you look at the trends in terms of the global organic market and the Canadian organic market, it grows year on year. So I'm just wondering how that all fits together.
Yeah, I think there is absolutely some confusion. That's why I showed those questions. People are asking lots of questions about what does organic mean. So I do think there's a lot of confusion there. I think that's why you've seen a real, to me, it's about building trust through transparency. And that's why I showed those examples as well. So anytime that you can invite the consumer in and show them rather than just tell them, you are going to build trust. We know that. So anything that you can do in terms of your practices, and again, consumers trust farmers, not farming necessarily. And so I think that's also just showing those practices, showing you out in your fields, showing the decisions you make and the care you take. I think, these are all ways to build trust, because consumers aren't going to understand, frankly, the minutia of, when can I use a pesticide versus not, natural versus not natural. Those kind of words, it's kind of similar to the Buttergate example I used with palmitic acid. People in the industry understand, consumers aren't going to catch those nuances.
Yeah, no, I understand the trust bit of it, but I was just wondering about translation to actual sales. Like, can that be measured? Like, how much does confusion translate into, I'm confused, I'm not going to buy organic?
Yeah, I haven't seen any research around that. That would be, yeah, that would be a big study to understand that. And yeah, and that's why I said, you know, this past couple of years, the growth in organics is great, but make sure you put a bit of an asterisk there, because we're going into different times, right? As things open up, some things were supply chain issues, and you know, as consumers are getting squeezed, where are they going to prioritize buying organic versus not buying organic?
And I think too, you know, when you look at 2013 to 2015, organic growth was in the double digits consistently. And when you said it's 7%, it's like, yeah, okay, not that 7% isn't bad.
That was US data, so Canada may be different. That was the most recent I could get, but yeah, it's dipped down a bit, right?
And one more question, how does that I'd be interested to know how that compares to kind of the increase or decrease in other market categories, right? Is that growth, like, is that growth, the reduction in growth kind of like parallel, like just having some comparators would help contextualize the information. But it's been a fantastic, you know, presentation. And I really appreciate.
Well, we know food inflation is going up, right? So if you look at some categories, you're seeing value sales would be up, you know, 8-10% just based on inflation. So you also have to put that into the mix as well, as things are getting more expensive.
I know we've got about 3 more minutes left for any questions. So if anyone has one, post it on the chat. I know myself, just sort of in you know, while we have your expertise, are there certain strategies in communicating to the consumer that you've seen are like the must-dos? Because there's so many, you know, it's a big question on how. What's sort of a snippet of your knowledge on that?
Well, I mean, certainly certifications help. You know, consumers, and that's why this whole regenerative agriculture, you know, what does that mean? You know, there is no certifying body. So it's kind of a nice idea, and you know, industry is getting in there. They see an opportunity to drive sales, so they're trying to define it. But that's not how you're going to build trust. Consumers trust third-body certifications as long as they understand what you know, it raises the level of trust. So I think that that's really important. And again, just as much transparency as possible. Like I said, you know, most people are shopping now with this in their hand, right? And they're able, you know, there's a lot of misinformation coming from south of the border, which unfortunately consumers often confuse farming practices down there with farming practices up here. So you need to make sure you're getting your message out. We did an interesting campaign for the Canadian Roundtable of Sustainable Beef, which actually won an award last year. And we went into, I'll call it the belly of the beast. They were very brave as a client. And we went and did some pretty out there advertising with Gen Zs in Toronto, talking about how eating beef could heal the planet. And comparing it to other practices. And, you know, we were prepared for lots of blowback, lots of everything. And you know what? Consumers went, they checked out what they were curious to learn more. So, you know, this younger generation, you know, I'm hoping there's more critical thinkers there. And that, you know, it was a pretty simple ad campaign on Facebook, on Instagram, but just trying to shake up existing perceptions. And, you know, it drove a lot of people, a lot of eyeballs to understanding what sustainably grown beef is about, and helped them get their message out. So, you know, the days of the big advertising campaigns, you don't, you know, there's ways of doing it just by connecting with consumers digitally that I think can make a big difference. And also, again, just, you know, those QR codes that got a second life during the pandemic, you know, those can go on packaging. You can let consumers, similar to what I showed with the Co-op Italia example, you know, you can invite consumers in by just snapping that code. It goes directly, you can show them like, this is where that product was raised. These are the conditions. These are the people that harvested it. And this is how they were cared for. So I think making, you know, consumers are going to trust something that they can see more than something they read on your website. So I think that's another way of making sure you're mattering to me.
We'll close off with one last question from Scott Gillespie. He asked any insight on GMO versus CRISPR and whether the younger generation and that trust it more than GMO.
Yeah, I don't think people quite yet understand CRISPR. I will say that I think first use cases are so important. If you look at where GMOs probably went really offside, first use case was a big corporation using it to make more money for themselves. There was no consumer benefit, right, to GMO when it was first launched. And I think that was why GMOs largely have been rejected. With CRISPR, some of the examples I've seen in food, it's about, you know, it's been in the case of Arctic apples, for instance, it's about extending shelf life, about preventing browning. So if you can talk to something, I think that's a consumer benefit and also a planet benefit. So, you know, less food waste, that is probably going to resonate more with the younger generation. But I don't think CRISPR's really hit anybody's radar yet because you just don't see it out there. So it's more industry understands CRISPR's coming and what the implications could be. But I would say, you know, going forward, it's going to be critical that first use case. But, you know, we know that younger generations trust science and think science is what's going to solve the climate issue. So they will be more accepting, I believe, of CRISPR technology.
Well, Joanne, thanks for that presentation. It's not something that we commonly talk about at these organic shows. It's often about how we're producing and science and things like that. But it is key. Food is a competitive market, and we need to be competitive minded in that, in getting our message out. So thanks so much for that.